Nugget number one is no site is so important that Google has to keep you in the search engine. Google does not need you in their search engine. They might want you in the search engine, but they don't need you. Some of the other nuggets is any change to the URL structure, any massive change to on-page content, that's a migration.
Hi everyone, it's Olga Zar from SEO Sly. Today I have a very special guest. This is Charles. Charles is a very well-known enterprise SEO expert. I have been following Charles for a while. I think it was mainly because of SEO Fight Club. I am a huge fan of that show, and at some point I think Charles started to be a co-host, and this is when I got to know him even better. Charles, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks a lot for having me on today.
I'm super happy to have you, and I know this is going to be a very interesting episode. We'll talk about Charles' SEO story and also about enterprise SEO and migrations. So 3 topics. Charles, before we get started, can you briefly introduce yourself, like what your path in SEO, how long have you been where you are now, and all of that?
Yeah, no, I've been in SEO for quite a while. I always find different folks' SEO origin story interesting. I always joke that people get into SEO by inspiration or desperation, and mine was definitely on the desperation side. In the early 2000s, around between 1999 and like 2005, I did a lot of online selling, and that was actually my full-time job for a little while as well. I was doing eBay, then I got into Amazon as well, and I got to do a few fights occasionally with eBay. And I said, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to have my own website. I don't need them. So I started my own website. Again, I was around 2003, 2005, someplace in that range. And I didn't know anything about doing a website. So I made a website, and someone said, you have to have analytics on it. So I put analytics on it. And then I saw that there was this thing called organic traffic. And I'm like, what is that? And I did some searching. Folks like, oh, that's coming from the search engines. At the time, Yahoo, Alta Vista, Google was in the game. And I'm like, what does this mean? And folks are telling me, oh, well, that's free traffic. And I like the sound of free traffic. So I started messing around and making websites just purely to get SEO traffic. And I started actually developing traffic. I'm like, great, this is awesome. And then someone told me, well, you got to put an affiliate program on those sites. I'm like, what does that mean? And so someone explained it to me, and I started making money that way. Like, this is really awesome. So around 2006, 2007, I said, I've been doing this for a couple years now, and I was doing kind of I would call it a churn and burn strategy, where I'd build a couple sites up, and then I was doing every dirty trick in the book you could possibly come up with, and they would ultimately, after about a year and a half, maybe 2 years at the most, just crash and burn. And I'm like, this is exhausting. I can't do this. And I think it was my wife at the time suggested, like, well, why don't you see if you can get a job in SEO? And because I really enjoyed it, and I'm like, that sounds like a good idea. And so I didn't know if there were jobs in SEO. This was 2006, 2007. And there was a company called LexisNexis. It's a company that does legal services and marketing for legal professionals. So I started with the company. They actually they had an office right down the road from me, maybe 20, 30 minutes away at the most, here in New Jersey. And I started working for them. They do small and medium-sized law firms. I was there for about a year or so. And it was a great way to get into the industry. It was a lot of learning, The company was growing, the company was learning, I was growing and learning as well. And that's when I just totally fell in love with SEO. There was no turning back after that point. I worked for an e-commerce company for about 6 years after that. They had a whole plethora. They had about a dozen different sites. It was all party supplies and Halloween costumes and whatnot, which was actually a great place to work when you had young kids, because I had young kids at the time. And after them, I got a little company called Verizon reached out to me, and I said, talk to them for a little bit. They said, hey, we need someone to help us with our SEO. And this was around 2016 by then. And I asked, well, how much SEO experience do you have? What do you do? What does the company do right now for SEO? And they said, well, we really don't do anything. And I'm like, this is 2016. I'm like, this is the internet was a thing. Google was a thing in 2016. Yeah. And so I'm like, well, let me give it a shot. So I jumped in, and that was my foray back into enterprise. So I was a little bit enterprise in the very beginning with LexisNexis, and I was kind of small, medium organization for about 5 to 6 years. And I got back in enterprise. And I've kind of been there ever since. So I was with Verizon for about 6 years. And then several years ago, a company that many of you probably heard of called Fox, they reached out to me and said, hey, we need someone to do SEO. And I asked them the same question. I said, well, what SEO have you ever had? And it's like, well, we really haven't done much with SEO, and we haven't had an SEO. And I'm like, how? How has that not happened? So I'm like, yes, let me come in there, and I'll happily give you guys a hand and help you. And so I've been there for several years now. So yeah, that's kind of my brief journey into SEO. And I found that enterprise, I enjoy enterprise because it's very different kinds of problems that a small, medium-sized company would have. It's the same issues, but it's you approach it from a different point of view. You also do things in enterprise that you'd never do in any other organization.
Yeah.
For example, I've spent a lot of time trying to keep things out of Google. You'd be amazed how many times in an enterprise organization someone says, we don't want this page in Google. How do you get it out of Google? Or there's parts of our website we just don't want Google crawling. And there's stage sites, there's development sites, and somehow someone puts, you'd be amazed how many of these large organizations have stage and development sites that are crawlable, they're publicly accessible and crawlable by Google. And so we spend a lot of time keeping those things out of the search engine and having to educate the engineering teams on how to keep not just the search engine, but people in general out of these very important parts of our site.
I also did enterprise for a couple of years. At the agency I worked, Procter and Gamble was their main client, and I kind of know, I think, what it looks like. But if you could define what are the differences between SEO, like normal SEO, and enterprise SEO, if someone who doesn't know hears enterprise SEO, so what's different here?
Yeah, so there's lots of little things. Some of the things from a purely SEO standpoint, enterprise, unlike a smaller, medium-sized company where they can just jump in and make changes. I've got friends, I do consulting work, and folks will say, hey, how do I do this? I say, hey, change this. They can just jump in the site and make a change. In enterprise, you can't do that. Enterprise, it's too big. There's too many people. You couldn't have everybody jumping in. So there's always a very specific process. So there has to be tickets that developed. And in the ticket, you have to explain, here's the problem we're facing. Here's what we're trying to solve. Here's how we'd like to solve the problem. It's got to go through a whole process where the developers look at it and say, they like the idea, they don't like the idea, that we can. There's a lot of steps that have to be involved to make a change. On the positive, though, is once you make a change, you're not just changing one page or a dozen pages. You might be changing 30,000 pages in one shot. So it's cool that when the change does finally go out, I've had things that take literally months just to make small changes to a page. Once the change goes out, you'll get, again, 25, 35,000 pages get updated. And then you can watch in Search Console. You don't even need any special tools at that point. You can see that everything's starting to go up, and that's kind of cool. That's what I really enjoy, is that when you make a change in an enterprise site, you can see an increase and you can see something go up.
You have a lot of leverage there, right?
Yeah, you've got, so I always joke, you hear me joke about on Fight Club that, how do I rank a page? I just put a page up on the website and it starts ranking. What, everybody doesn't do that? So that's the benefit of enterprise. You can put a page up, but the drawback is you have, it takes a long time to get things done. Sometimes it takes, you have a lot of stakeholders. There's times you can't do things, even though it makes perfect sense to do something, you can't do it for some other reason, maybe a legal reason or a brand protection reason. It's just something that the business says, no, we're just not doing that. Even though, yes, you're right. We're not arguing with you, Charles. It'll probably drive more traffic, but we're not, in this case, we have to forego the traffic for other reasons. Something different about enterprise than a smaller, medium-sized organization is that your role changes. There are other things you're doing that you don't, that I don't want to say average SEO, but the small and medium-sized company doesn't have to worry about as much. So for example, risk management is a huge thing for us. I'm constantly looking at things, and number one, making sure we don't break something that's already working, or we don't make something worse. So that's a big part of it. I also worry about, you can be a lot more aggressive when you're a small, medium-sized company that you can't do as a large organization. Not only potentially Google could be keeping an eye on you, but there's a lot of people looking at your site on a day in, day out basis. Yeah. And if you do something that's a little gray, I'm not even saying black hat, but just even a little gray, someone's going to write an article about you, say, oh, look what so-and-so is doing look what Verizon's doing on their website. Yeah. And you don't want to be internet famous that way. So there is a lot of risk management involved. Also the communication upward. I know Ted and I talk about this a lot. He's had on Fight Club, he's definitely had some enterprise experience. There's a lot of consensus building. There's a lot of making sure you're communicating upwards what a change impacts it. So again, when it's your own site, you can say, well, hey, there's more traffic here, I'm just going to do it. When you want to do it on a larger site, the company wants to understand what's the business reason. Okay, we get more traffic, but what's that going to mean bottom line? How is that going to affect our numbers? And on an enterprise, going after an extra 1,000 people a month, that's a drop in the bucket. That doesn't mean anything. Folks are asking, how do you raise our traffic by 1 million people a month? What do we have to do to get an extra 1 million people? That's a whole different problem you have to solve. So it's a scaling issue.
Yeah. But I had a situation like recently, a very, very huge company came to me. They had a migration before, like millions of visits. They lost a lot of traffic. And I really identified exactly what happened, why. Mostly because they migrated. They thought this was basically like the same page, but they removed a lot of content. I checked in Wayback Machine, and they simply killed a ton of pages. And I was asking, like, can you restore those pages? Then you will regain that traffic like all at once. They said, no, this was a decision like we are not like dependent on. So do you come across such situations that because of a decision, they are willing to like sacrifice 50% of a very huge traffic? Have you had
So
such a situation?
I've had in the past, I've had organizations come to me. I've had members of the organization come to me and say, "Oh, we're not." I literally have had people say, "We're not worried about traffic."
Yeah, something like that.
And my response to them is always, because one of the things I've learned in a large organization, that a team may not be worried about traffic, but their boss might be, or more important, their boss's boss. Like, you can't, I don't accept when folks come to me and say, "Oh, we're not worried about traffic." I'm like, I don't believe that. Are you going to tell your boss's boss you're not worried about traffic? Because something tells me that that person is worried about traffic. She's going to come back and say, "Yeah, no, we're worried about traffic." But you can't be too combative, because then everybody starts locking down and doesn't want to work with you. So it's about building the business case. So what I always tell them is I try to draw it to numbers. So you're right, traffic doesn't mean much to folks, but I'll say, okay, we're going to lose 1 million people a month here. Now, you're not worried about that traffic, but you understand this is the revenue that these 1 million people drive for us. Once you put it in dollars, suddenly people don't know traffic, people don't know visits and even page views sometimes, but everybody understands the dollars. And when you put it in that context, typically I find teams just like, oh, okay, yeah, no, we probably don't want to lose that, because everybody understands budgets. Everybody understands that their team has a specific budget line item attached to it. And if you don't bring in the revenue, then suddenly that budget might get cut. And cutting budgets means cutting people in large organizations. So nobody wants that. Funny you mentioned that the organization decided that, they want to get rid of some content. In their mind, it was the same page, I bet. Like, there's like, oh no, it's the same page. Cut this section out. I've had similar arguments with people. I've also had arguments with technical teams. I want to say arguments, not necessarily arguments, but just like they're coming from one angle. They'll say, hey, we're changing the website. And I'll say, okay, let's talk to me. We're migrating, but we're not changing the website. I'm sorry. That's what they'll come to me and say, we're migrating, but nothing's changing. And I'm like, sure. Can you give me an example of what it's going to look like? And sometimes they hem and haw, sometimes they can show it to me immediately, and they'll show me the URL. I'm like, this URL structure is different. This is not the same. Like, oh, no, the content's the same. Like, that's fine. The content's exactly the same, but the URL structure is not the same. So I've seen it the opposite way as well. I've also had teams come to me and say, don't worry, Charles, because I'll give everybody the lecture about how we can't change. Don't want to change the content. Don't want to change the URL structure. Like, don't worry, nothing's changing. And then I find out there's not a trailing slash at the end of the URL. To a search engine, that's a big deal. That's a change. And I'm like, sorry, that is a change to the URL structure. Like, are you kidding me? I'm like, no. And then I explained to him, here's why. And actually, there's a couple good, John Mueller's put out a few good tweets over the years. One of them, and there was one that I've used, I posted in LinkedIn in the past, but it was showing what Google considers the same and not the same. One of the things he calls out is trailing slash versus not trailing slash. And anything other than a home page, a trailing slash versus not trailing slash, one means directory, one means page, and Google treats them differently. So I always tell them, any difference to the URL at all, we got to go through a migration process. It's okay to change it. I don't tell the business they can't change it. I say, it's easier if you don't. It's easier for me if you don't. But if we have to change it for business purposes, that's fine. But there's a process you have to go through. Otherwise, you will lose traffic on migration.
Yeah, I had a few of such cases where someone came to me, they had a migration and they migrated from one CMS to another. And this was exactly the thing, trailing slash. Yep. Yeah, but talking about migrations, you did an awesome presentation at SEO Rockstars. I saw it. Can you maybe share 1 or 2 nuggets from it? Because it was really cool about migrations.
Yeah. Nugget number one is no site is so important that Google has to keep you in the search engine. That was like the first thing I showed in the presentation is folks will say, oh no, because I've had folks tell me, yeah, but Google can't afford not to have us in their search engine. Don't assume that. And I showed several examples in the presentation of, Royal, I think it was the Royal UK. They decided to change their URL structure, absolutely decimated their traffic. I think Wired did years and years ago. You can definitely, Google does not need you in their search engine. They might want you in the search engine, but they don't need you. I guess if you're big enough, Google may reach out to you and say, hey, you realize you're not in our search engine anymore. I've read a few stories where that happened, I think with Twitter or something like that years ago. The other, some of the other nuggets is any change to the URL structure, any massive change to on-page content, that's a migration. Often folks will just think, okay, kill the old page, bring up the new page, step 301. That's it. That's all you got to worry about. that's a migration. You can do that. You will lose traffic. And the reason you lose traffic, the fundamental reason why migrations can be so problematic is when you drop the old page and bring up the new page, the search engine thinks there are two versions of that same page out there. It doesn't realize the old page has gone away. And the reason it doesn't realize the old page has gone away is because it has no way of finding the old page. So Google understands the web by what it can crawl. And if it can't crawl the old site, number one, it doesn't know it's gone away. And number two, it may not know about the new site. And if it finds the new site by you force feeding its site map, XML sitemaps, that's fine. You can do it. But Google still thinks the old site's sitting out there. So it just doesn't know what to do. The analogy I like to use is if you get a new phone and change your phone number, but don't tell anybody you've changed your phone number. No one's going to know how to reach you. And if you say, oh, it's okay, Charles, I forwarded my old phone number to my new phone number, that's fine as long as that forwarding works. But no one's going to know your new phone number. If you're expecting people to find you via the new phone number, that'll never happen, because no one knows it yet, because you haven't advertised it properly. So you have to train the search engine. You have to train it by, there's techniques you can use using canonicals, using 301 redux, but you have to, essentially the trick I use is the search engine has to find your new site by crawling your old site. So it's a couple week process I have folks go through. It's, the devs always come to me and say, do we really have to do this? I'm like, yep, you got to. And then when you go through it, it works fine. And that's another big nugget. If you do an SEO migration successfully, it is the most thankless job you'll ever have, because nothing happens. Like you're stage one, then you go to site one, then you go to site two. You don't lose any traffic, and everybody's like, well, that's easy. We didn't need any SEO. It's like, well, there was a disaster waiting for us. If often what I try to do to keep from that happening is I spend a lot of time with the team to make sure the new site is better optimized than the old site, easier to crawl, better optimized both technically and content-wise, better internal linking. And then what will happen is you'll migrate from the old site to the new site. You won't lose any traffic, but you'll typically start to gain some traffic. Yeah. And that's how you have a really successful migration. That's how you have people buy into migrations.
Yeah, totally. And do you use the migration tool within Google Search Console?
Never.
Why?
Never. Don't use it. That's
why?
A good nugget.
Because I heard it on SEO Fight Club. That's why I'm asking. So why never use it?
I never use the change of address. And the problem is, once you change, so I have site A, change address to site B. I go into Search Console. I can't now look at site A within Search Console. So I can't look and see, is Google still trying to index site A URLs? So if you think of Search Console, you go into the pages report or the settings crawl stats, and you want to see what's Google doing with site A, you will lose that ability once you go into Search Console and say, I'm doing a migration, change everything from A to B. Basically, A stops existing in Search Console. You try to access it, it takes you right to B. So don't do that migration, even though Google will say, oh, you should do it. No, don't, because you lose all this valuable data in Search Console. So that's why I never do it. I always joke, ask me how I learned that lesson. I did that. And then I realized, what am I supposed to do? I can't go back and get that content now. So what I ended up having to do is verify. I used it via the top level. I changed from www, whatever it was, to the new domain. I went to the top level property in Search Console and then could see all the data that way. So fortunately, I lucked out. But
I think this is how I do it as well. Yeah. And what about crawl stats? And because you have been talking a little bit about Googlebot and how you observe its activity, especially before some updates, core updates. So tell me more about it.
Yeah, so I'd like to take credit for learning all this stuff. I didn't. For coming up with all this stuff, I didn't. I've learned it from other folks. I know Karen Holzman does some great work with her crawl, no crawl. And she's the one who taught me and really showed me, like, Googlebot, there's different Googlebots. I'm like, what do you mean? And she showed me if you go to Google documentation to the user agents, they straight up say, here's our user agent, and this part changes regularly. And so I went into the search, I went into our log data, and I started looking up, like, what do you know? It does change. It changes regularly. I'm like, this is interesting. So I started tracking it. And what I noticed is Google would say, hey, we have a new update. And it would be, I don't know, March 1st. And I would look on our log file, and like, no, there's no new update. And then what I noticed is that when Google runs an update, they seem to have to launch a new bot. My guess, and it was interesting, Gary from Google came out relatively recently, meaning in the last year or so, and he mentioned that the Google bot's dumb. It's just there to collect data. And so my assumption is that they need a new Google bot to collect certain data points that they weren't collecting before. So when they change their algorithm, they're looking for new data. They're looking for new data points, and they need a new data. They need a new Google bot to do that. So I monitor that regularly. I map out once the new, Google bot hit us on 4 p.m. on Monday the 17th. And I'll put that in my chart, and then and then watch and see, does traffic go up, does traffic go down, does traffic stay the same? If traffic goes down on the same day, I'm like, we might have gotten hit by the search engine a little bit, or they might have refactored something, but that's not guaranteed. I have. So we had again, you get enough data, you see enough things eventually. I remember it was a Wednesday. It was a Wednesday late morning. Our 404s just shot through the roof, and we were watching our log files. They shot through the roof. Google announced that they had a new update. We checked our log files. Yep, new Google bot. And like, what do you know? This new Google bot's causing all these 404s for some reason. Oh, something must be broken in Google. No, we actually at the exact same time just happened to launch a bad XML sitemap, and Google picked it up. It had the XML sitemap was fine, but all the URLs were bad. So just because you go up or down at the same time as an update doesn't always mean it's because of the update. It could have been something you did.
Yeah, interesting. Coming back to migrations, there are like obvious mistakes you can make, like forget about redirects, change URLs where you could not change them. But what are some other less obvious mistakes that you have observed people make?
Okay, that's a good question. Less obvious. The big one that everyone seems to make, I know we already talked about this, was thinking the URL structure is the same when it really isn't. Again, that trailing slash thing, or they change from dashes to underscores or something like that in the URL structure. That's a common one. Another change I'll sometimes see is like little things like canonical tags. Folks will change their canonical tags, but then they don't change their hreflangs. So the hreflangs or the OG or the Twitter card URLs, those all point to the old URL, and they've updated everything else. So that's been, I've seen
staging.
Yeah, exactly. And I've seen directories, not directories, navigations not updated properly. So you have to be careful there. What are the weird things that folks done? Keep the redirects up. I've had teams drop the redirects after a week or two, saying, we don't need those anymore. Like, no, they need to stay up. And people ask, well, how long? And I say forever. And I know, devs always die a little bit inside when I tell them that. I'm like, I'm sorry, it's not me, it's the search engine. And the reason why you have to keep, so folks have done some tests. I've seen some good articles about, do you need to really keep these 301 redirects up forever or not? My answer is yes, if there are links to the old URLs.
Yeah.
If there are no links to the old URLs, after probably a year, 2 years, you can probably bring it down. But check your Ahrefs or SEMrush or whatever you want to check, whatever your tool of choice is. If there are links pointing to those old URLs, you need to keep those 301 redirects up. Even if Google doesn't need it, realize there are people clicking on those links, and you can't bring them to a dead page. So that's one of the main reasons why you have to keep them up. When there are links, you definitely have to keep those URLs up.
Yeah, that makes sense. So talking about links, in enterprise SEO, you don't earn links, right? You earn, but you don't build links, right?
Yeah, it's all earned links. But I also say we do a lot of content syndication. There's a lot of, and very large sites, Yahoo News and Bing News, and we have deals with them where they take our content and they put it on their site. We have people, quite frankly, they steal our content constantly. We're always trying to whack them all. Once we stop one site, another site starts doing it. As an SEO, I don't have a huge problem with it because one of the things I tell everybody, I tell our editorial teams, are good internal linking is good external linking. Yeah. If we build good internal links, when our content gets syndicated out there, now we have all these websites pointing to us using the anchor text we want. So that's one of the lessons I keep teaching. Like, good internal linking is good external linking because we're sending out content to folks. Internal linking, one thing that people sometimes think, oh, you just have to put the link in your footer or header nav and you're going to rank well. Yes, to a point. There is a diminishing returns in having the exact same link over and over again. And we had a conversation in Fight Club. I forget exactly. It was in the Google leak, but there was something in the Google leak where I was reading. I said, this might be why internal links, you can only have so many. It's like, so if I link internally, I remember, for example, when we were Verizon, they launched a speed test page, a speed test tool. And I said, we got to get this out for the public. And it was interesting because the team's like, really? Other people want a speed test? I'm like, yes, people want a speed test. It shouldn't just be an internal tool. So we launched it, and I got a link in the footer. It exploded once we put the link in the footer. And then I found out there were other templates. So with the large enterprise sites, there's different. So the sales page have one template, the support page have another template, yada, yada, yada. All the templates didn't have the same footer. So once I rolled it out to all the templates, I was expecting a big jump. I did not get much of a jump after that. Knowing what I know now, what I should have done is each of the templates could have used a different anchor text, and I would have probably got a significant jump once I changed the anchor text. So there seems to be a diminishing return using the same anchor text internally over and over and over again. Once you pass, I don't know what the number is, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 links, you really don't get the same benefit. If you change up the anchor text, there seems to be a benefit.
So it would be best to change this to something very similar, right? Or
Right.
something like a variation from Cora, right?
Right, exactly. Using a tool like Cora, I would use one of the variations. Typically what I would do is, okay, this is the keyword I want to rank for. What's the back? So I always have like a footprint of keywords. So we'll use that speed test tool. So, we just put speed test, but we could put online speed test, free speed test tool, computers, like there's all different variations.
Yeah.
Find the top like 3 to 5 terms I just use SEMrush or something like that, or SEMrush, I still call it SEMrush.
Yeah.
SEMrush. I'd find the top 3 to 5 keywords, and I just mix it up using those. And so I might
Uh-huh.
not even go to the extent of using like a core and getting all the variations.
Yeah, so many pages that may not be
Yeah,
possible.
I only have so many templates I can change, usually 2 to 3, so variations.
Uh-huh. Okay, let's talk about what a day in the life of an enterprise SEO looks like when you are at work. Like,
Mhm.
it isn't probably you wake up, you log in into Google Search Console, la la la. It probably looks more dynamic. Tell me about it.
Yeah, it depends on the day. So it depends on the day.
Uh-huh.
I will say the first thing I do every day is we have daily SEO reports. I log into it and look at it. It's not that I'm worried about, looking at our traffic day to day organically. All the SEOs like daily. You can't judge anything by daily. But what I'm looking for is making sure nothing's broken, because things break, and when they
Yeah.
break big on an enterprise site. So I watch. I think it is important to watch the daily traffic because I want to make sure nothing broke. And on the opposite, did anything go viral? Like, we'll have articles kind of go viral, so to speak, and I like to see what went viral, and then try to use that, take a learning from that, like what happened that we can replicate. A great example is one of our sites is a website, Fox Weather, and anytime there's a hurricane, our traffic
Oh.
takes off because people are interested in weather. Of course, it makes sense. So what we did is all right, well, we know hurricanes are popular. We know hurricanes, people are searching hurricanes. We know they can drive a lot of traffic. So let's take a look and see, can we come up with a template for our editors? And we realized that we could come up with a template. We can tell the editors, hey, look, people search a very specific way. Doesn't matter whether it was a hurricane this year or next year or 5 years from now, they're asking the same questions, they're doing the same kind of searches. So we can provide them with a template. Anytime you do an article, here are things you need to make sure you do. So we try to give as much. So I use a lot of the data, that day-to-day data, as kind of feedback to what are we doing well, what aren't we doing well, and what guidance can I provide to the larger teams.
Makes sense. What about how often do you have meetings, for example, like every day,
Oh,
5 times a
meetings
day?
every day, all day.
Okay.
Actually, I'm a pretty aggressive meeting pruner. I will combine meetings whenever possible. I'll shut them down early whenever possible. I am unusual when it comes to the enterprise, in that most folks have 5 hours of meetings minimum in an 8 to 9 hour day, and sometimes more. So I try to keep it light because we got work to do. So I'm always, so let's just say,
Yeah.
well, Olga, you're on another team. We're having a great conversation. We're going through everything. Oh, we're at the half-hour point. We've kind of, it's come kind of to a point. It's like, I'll just jump right in and say, hey, if you don't have any other subjects to discuss, happy to give you some time back for the rest of your day. And if there's an important thing that needs to be covered, they'll say, oh, no, we got to talk about this. Like, oh, good point. I forgot about that. Yeah, let's talk about that. But if not, folks, like, yeah, you know what? I think we're done. Cool. Have a great day. If you need anything, you can always message me on, our inter-office messaging, or email me, or just give me a call, and happy to chat. So that's one thing I always do. I try to make myself as available as possible, so that because I might not meet with somebody every day or every week, they know they can always reach out to me. I'm also trying to be proactive with my meetings, where I'll set it bi-weekly. You and you're in another team. We may not interface all the time, but let's meet every 2 weeks. And if we find every 2 weeks doesn't work, let's change it every 3 weeks. Once a month may not be enough, but let's do it like maybe every 3 weeks. That should be enough. I always ask people for agendas going into meetings. What's the agenda? What's our goal for the meeting? I kind of force, I don't want to just get on the call and talk to people. Like, I love talking to folks, love talking about SEO, but we also got work to do. So I try to be a little, I think I'm unusual when it comes to enterprise, though, because I want to make sure that I have time to do other things, that my team has time to do other things. But I do have lots of touch points. I mean, I'll have 4 or 5 meetings a day without a question, always touching base with different teams. Maybe, what are you working on? Here's what we're working on. Here's something we're doing that may impact you. Are you doing anything that's going to impact us? A lot of communicating upwards. Here's what's happening in the business that's good. Here's what's happening in the business that's bad. Here's help. Here are things I need help with to get done. But like I said, I'm always happy to shut down meetings. I'm always happy to combine meetings. If the same person is on 2 different meetings in the day, let's do everything in one meeting. Let's not spread it over 2 meetings.
Yeah, sure. But how many websites are you in charge of, sort of, in your job?
Oh yes, I'm sorry, I didn't answer that question. So yeah, that's a good question. So
Yeah.
we have a whole bunch of answers. The ones that are directly under me are Fox News, Fox Business, Fox Weather, Outkick. I consult regularly with the Fox Sports folks. We have what's called our affiliate stations, and there's like 20 some odd of those. I meet the team weekly to talk to them about things they can increase on their site. So I'd say, there's about 4 or 5 sites where it's on me 100%, nobody else. And I consult regularly with the other team members for, a couple dozen sites across the org.
That's a lot. Have you ever had in this job or in the previous one, like a very critical situation, something very bad happened? Like, what was it and how did you resolve it?
Bad things happen all the time in enterprise. Things are always breaking.
Right.
So when, in the beginning, I'd get very worked up over it, like, oh my God, we got to fix this. And then over the years, I've realized things break constantly. The key is know how to identify it fast, and then reach out to the right team. So recently we had a certain kind of page break, and at first it looked like, no, our Google traffic was dropping. Well, that can happen. And it did start around the same time as an update. And I'm like, I guess maybe we got hit a little bit by the update. I don't know. Our traffic wasn't down a lot, but 10%, that's a big hit for us. And then I started doing a little digging, and I'm like, it's been a little too, you get to know the traffic. That's another reason why I like looking at the daily. You just get to know the traffic. And my gut said there's something else. After about a week, my gut said there's something else going on. This isn't Google. So I looked into our log files, and I saw an increase in 500 errors. I'm like, that's a problem. 500 errors are a problem because Google will slow down its crawl of your server if you have too many 500 errors. So I identified the kinds of pages that were getting the 500 errors. I immediately reached out to the team, and I always go into a data collection mode. I want to collect as much data as possible for the team, because you have to understand, especially with enterprise, when you go to someone and say, these pages are broken, they have no context of what you're talking about. They've been working on 10 other vital things. You just come to them and want to drop a problem in their lap. That's not fair to them, but also they can't help you that much. So I'll immediately come and say, look, we've had a drop in traffic starting this date. So I'll kind of walk them through my journey. So we had a drop of traffic that started at this date. I'll show them the traffic chart. So I thought it was a Google thing. Now I think it's something that we have to do, because when I go into our logs, I see these 500 errors increase for these pages, and I'll show them that. And I'll say these 500 errors have not increased for any other page type. And I'll show them another chart where 500 errors were the same when you look across everything. And then I, so we dug a little bit deeper. We scanned this XML sitemap, and we found there were X percentage of them were 500 errors, which is a definite problem. And so now the team has some data, and like within an hour they can say, oh, it's because of this weird thing, and if this field wasn't filled out, it would create a 500 error on the site. And like they could solve that problem within about an hour. Now it's going to take them another day and a half to really get it fixed, and then we'll have to run some tests. But the cool thing is, by bringing as much data to them as possible, they can figure out the problem relatively easily. If you go to another team and just give them the problem, now they have to research it, and it's going to take longer for the problem to be solved.
And is like traffic from being meaningful for those websites, or is it like nothing?
Percentage wise, it's very small. It's very small. But we have one of our sites, actually, we've gotten up to 20. I've been spending a lot of time trying to get better Bing coverage. We've got 20% of our traffic got up to Bing, which I'm very happy about, because 80% Google is like amazingly small. As a percentage wise, whereas like 95+% Google. So I like diversifying our traffic as much as possible. I'm a big fan of diversification of traffic, not just from the different search engines, but within the search engines. So is everything coming in Google search? How about Google News? How about Google Discover? How about YouTube? How about images? Like there's so many different, when you start looking at the traffic, a lot of folks just think SEO and they think Google and they think Google search. Well, there's all kinds of different search engines. And even within the search engines, there's different mini or micro buckets within those that you need to be aware of. How are you on image search? How are you on video search? How are you on YouTube? How are you on local search? Like there's all these different ways that you need to make sure you diversify your traffic as much as possible to reduce the risk to the business of a change in the algorithm.
And have you been like brainstorming or creating a strategy for AI in Google, for optimization in Gemini, or that?
Yeah, AI is a great tool. A lot of folks, I think, are using AI wrong. Everyone wants AI to create a bunch of, let's be honest, garbage content. AI, write me a blog post. Woohoo, I don't have to write blog posts now because no one wants to write. Well, some people want to write. I don't want to write. The problem I found is AI, it's not great with it. It's okay. And I know some folks are like, if you do the right prompt, the prompt sculpting and write the right prompt, maybe you can do it. I haven't figured it out yet. What I do use AI for are things that people could do, but there's really no value add by having a person doing it versus a computer doing it. Here's an example. Summarize a video clip, or summarize a 1 hour video clip. If I do it, if you do it, if AI do it, we're all going to come up with basically the same thing. That's a great use for AI. I use AI all the time to tell me, code. how do I code this? Or check my code. And AI is great for it, as long as you're using the right GPT, because sometimes it will hallucinate.
Yeah.
But you kind of know the answer already, but you just need more data. That's another good thing for AI, when you just don't know. Like, I've had pictures of animals. Like, what's that animal? I give it to AI. What's this animal? What do you call this animal? It returns the name. I can fact check AI within seconds. I can Google, like, oh
Avocado.
yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yeah, avocado. There was a good example. Like, what is this? That was a great. That was an interesting Fight Club we had, where I just stumbled across it. I had someone that was doing a little work, and I remembered Honey Witcher had mentioned about OCR, and I'm like, I never really thought of doing OCR on YouTube thumbnails. So I just tried it out, and I stumbled into the fact that Google's Vision AI has a hard time identifying avocados. Now, I don't know much about avocados. I've learned that avocados come in all different shapes and sizes. I did not know that. I just picture, regular or green avocado and whatnot. But I learned that it does not always. So number one, I learned, make sure your images are being checked with Google's Vision AI. They're not probably using that with their algorithm, but it's similar. Can it identify the objects in the image? Can it identify the text in the image? Those are all things I had never considered doing. Now I do that regularly. I've learned that, what I think is obvious and what the search engine thinks obvious are not necessarily the same thing. I've also found that when you run your images through the Vision AI, it sees things that you and I may not notice. I ran a picture of a young lady through the picture, and it started identifying like jewelry and watches and hairstyles. Like, these are things I never even would have thought. It's like, woman standing in front of a store. That was all I saw. And Google's talking about she's wearing a crucifix, and she's wearing a certain kind of watch, and she's got a certain kind of hairstyle. And I'm like, these are all relevant. And these are all things you got to start thinking about, because the search engines are getting more sophisticated, and we can now see better what the search engines are seeing.
Totally. And if someone wanted to start working in enterprise SEO, what skills do you think they should develop or have to be successful there?
Patience and organization. You definitely have to be patient, and you have to be organized. And I learned that very early on, and I'm still learning that to this day. I still have that kind of, even though I've been doing enterprise for over a decade, I still have that kind of small business mentality, which I think has been part of my success. But also, you got to Charles, I tell myself, Charles, you just got to take a breath sometimes. Take a breath. It's going to take some time. It's important to understand processes, and it's about setting up process. So when you come in and say, hey, we need to change our title tags. Well, that's great, but what does that mean to everybody? So you have to do education. It's like, here's why it's important. I had a great conversation with somebody that was talking about rules for title tags, and say, they can only be 60 characters. And I'm like, that's not true. And like, what do you mean it's not true? It's like, well, let's go back to, what does this 60 character mean? First of all, there is no character limit. It's pixels, not characters. I'm a stickler for rules. Number two, so lowercase i's take up less space than uppercase z's. So that changes. Number two, I've run a test, and this was one of the things that Lee and Ted and I started talking about a couple conferences ago, and that's how we met up, is I ran a test on title tags to see, because I had a software, so I won't mention, it was a large service as a software company, reached out to our organization, and I said no, and then they reached to my boss and said, oh, your SEO is doing it wrong because your title tags are too long. And I said, so first of all, they've just blacklisted themselves. So don't ever, if you're a sales rep for a company, don't undermine the person you're trying to get to hire you. But anyways, so I got them on a call. I ran a test, and I said, okay, can you have a title tag too long? So I ran a test. Title tag, no keyword in the title tag, keyword all by itself. Then after, I think it was 25 words, 25 characters, 50 characters, I went up to 300 characters. And I found that did not matter. Then I did a second test and went up to 2,000 characters. Still didn't matter. It's funny, I spoke with Ted and Lee about that, years later, and then and Lee was like, oh, I went to 20,000 characters, which I thought 2,000 characters was.
I think even more at some point.
I think they went up to 200,000. I didn't say it because I wasn't 100% sure that's what he said, but I think you're right. I think they did do like 200,000, which is I think 2,000 characters is a ridiculously long title tag in my world. But anyways, what I found is that not only did it not matter, Google was still reading it, still indexing the page based on the keyword, but the placement of the keyword in the title tag didn't seem to matter. I ran a little correlation, a little quick correlation analysis using Excel, didn't seem to matter. I was like, so not only, because I'll hear SEO say, well, it may not matter, but you should put it in the beginning. Why? Because Google gives it more weight. Not from what I've seen. Now, I will put the important keywords in the beginning because people see it. Humans see it and are more likely to click on it. And as we've learned from both the leak and the Department of Justice lawsuit documents, Google is looking at user metrics. They are looking at clicks. So anyways, got on a call with this team, and I said, what's the problem? And they said, oh, your title tags are too long. I said, why do you mean? They said, well, it can't be more than 75 characters. I said, show me where Google says that. And I said, I'll wait. And it was a very awkward 2 or 3 minutes where they're Googling and trying to find it. And then they never found it, whereas Google said there was only 75 characters. And I said, and so I showed it's pixels, not characters. And Google does show. And then I showed an article, which I actually had just had published online that said, yeah, I've already done these studies. And they never bothered me ever since then. And the good news is my boss knew that what was going to happen going into that call. I'm not big into sucker punching people on a phone call, but when you do that, I'm gonna come back at you. Yeah. It's and that's the key. You got to have data, because if you have the data, you can then communicate with folks internally. Folks are coming from externally. They're trying to say. You'd be amazed how many SEO experts are in an organization the day after you start. Everybody has an opinion. Everybody says this is how you do this. This is how you do that. And you say, okay, well, where are you getting this data? And often they don't know, or they read it someplace, and you just break down, like, here's what I've learned. And I found this internally as well. Someone thought that 60 characters was the limit, and that's how the limit of a title tag should be in our CMS. I said, nope, here's it's based on pixels, not characters, but there's really not even a limit, and here's what we've learned. And so what we've learned is that, yeah, there should be some limit. A writer shouldn't be creating a 200 character title tag. So we give them a warning. When they go more than a certain distance, we give them a warning, but we don't stop them either, because maybe they need an extra couple characters, and that's okay. They can take a couple extra characters. Yeah. It's not a problem, but they should know that it's probably not going to be seen by users, which is going to impact their click-through rate.
Totally, because like Google is looking at the code, and this is in the code, so why shouldn't Google look at that, right?
Sure.
The last question, do you have any observations or anything, any insights regarding Google JavaScript SEO rendering problems in enterprise? Have you had some interesting situation because you probably have a lot of JavaScript on those websites, right?
Well, not if I can help it. Not if I can help it. Everyone who works with me knows that I love server-side rendering. So I'll give you a fun little bit of trivia. When Gary from Google came out at PubCon and said, we can render JavaScript, I was in that audience. I'm the one who asked him the question. So we don't need to do any pre-rendering? He's like, no pre-rendering is necessary. And that was PubCon, I think 2019, I think is when it happened. Oh. It was right before the pandemic, I remember. I think it was 2019. But anyways, I have found that Google, so here's the thing. Can Google crawl pages that are made by JavaScript? Yes. But it's a different process. It doesn't always run. And that's the key. So I'm still a server-side rendered guy, because that process is always running. The JavaScript processing isn't always running. And understand that if you're JavaScript, Google now has to take your page and run a separate process on it. So if time is of the essence, like a news site, you don't want Google spending more time trying to read your site and read your content. You need Google to know what was on that page instantly. So anything you can do to get Google to understand what's on the page, whether it's content, whether it's schema, whether it's whatever, you got to make it as easy as possible for Google to crawl and index your page. And that's the real key, not just for an enterprise site, but for all sites. Don't make it hard for the search engine. Whatever you're doing, don't make it hard for the search engine. Can Google do that? Yes. Goes back to our migrations. People ask me, can't Google figure this out? Yeah, Google can eventually figure it out. But do you want Google figuring it out? Because they're figuring it out on your dime, not their dime. So you can't make Google do guesswork. You can't make Google figure it out. They will, but they won't do it on your timetable. They'll do it on their timetable.
Yeah, totally. Great tip. Charles, so where can people find you? When we are beginning this conversation, I don't remember if it was recorded. You said you have nothing to sell.
Yeah, so I always say that in conferences. I get up there, I'll have my little slide with my face on it, and it's like, here's the good news. I got nothing to pitch. But you can find me online. LinkedIn is usually the best place to engage with me, because I don't know, for some reason, that's the one thing I'm most engaged with. I'm all over the place. You can find me on Facebook, and I bounce around on Skype, and I'm all over the place. Typically, just Google Charles Taylor SEO. You got to include the SEO though, because if you don't include the SEO, you find another Charles Taylor, and he was nowhere near as nice of a guy as I am. He's like a warlord from Africa or something like that. Okay. So you don't want to interact with him. And he doesn't know anything about SEO either. So you got to talk to me about SEO.
So always add SEO.
Always add the SEO, and you will find me.
Okay, perfect. Charles, thank you so much for being my guest. So many tips, so much knowledge. Yeah, I think people will love this episode, and I hope to have you sometime in the future.
That'd be great. Yeah, happy to come back.
Yeah. So thank you. Thanks everyone, and bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.